You're very welcome to Compass Media. It's Sunday, the 5th of March, 2023, and I'm joined by George O'Malley, who is the spokesperson for a farming organisation that is about to be launched shortly. They call themselves the Farmers Alliance. You're very welcome to Compass Media, George.
Thank you very much, Anna.
Well, I suppose I could begin by saying that you're launching your farm organisation into what is already a very crowded field with the IFA, the ICSA, the ICMSA, Beef Plan, the Independent Farmers of Ireland, the Hill Farmers and Natura Association. It's a very crowded field, George. What's going to be different about your farming organisation?
Well, it is very crowded, and that in itself, speaks volumes and poses a lot of questions. Why so many for a relatively small country, and also the number of farmers that are actually decreasing? The problem is that none of those organizations are actually representing the farmers at all. I've gone to a number of farmer meetings down the years, and invariably, a word which I've heard at those meetings by some of the officers is, we will be, or we are fighting for the farmers. Now, the fighting invariably, means some form of a protest, a placard protest, a demonstration, a march, a tractor run, some sort of a stoppage in an urban area, in a built-up area, and some bit of talking by some of the officers about what the issues are. But we had one recently in Roscommon, where I think it was the IFA had a meeting in relation to the situation with the sheep, and they were marching around a roundabout in Roscommon town with placards. They were annoying the people who were coming into the town about their business. And there's a meat plant out the road in Atlee. I don't think any of those, senior officials or officers of management were quaking in their boots about this. It's meaningless. It's futile. It's an awful bad use of resources, and it's misleading the farmers because it's getting nowhere. So this will be quite different. There'll be no marches. There'll be no protests. There'll be none of that stuff. We're going to get involved in a completely different end of the business. Which is looking at why it is that the primary producer is continually squeezed to the point where the viability and the future of them and the people that come after them is really threatened. That's what we're about.
And there are quite a number of issues facing the farming community in the years ahead, and we'll come back to those later, namely the proposal to re-wet large tracts of reclaimed land and also the reduction in the national herd. So if you're not going to be marching and holding meetings, what exactly are you going to be doing?
Well, we look at the as it were, the chain of production in the farm. And it starts with inputs, which is labor, fertilizer, feed, those are the main ones, and energy. And then you have the on-farm management, and then you have the producers going into the marketplace. Now, at the moment, the primary producer has very little say into those major cost inputs, the fertilizer and the feed and the energy, really none. And they have no share whatsoever or no input into the market or into the added value of the produce. Like, for example, if you take in the dairy sector at the moment, the way this has been operating for some time, is that the dairy PLCs collect the milk today, for argument's sake, the 5th of March, and they tell the farmers on the 5th of April what they will pay them for it. Now, that's a ridiculous situation. If you take the livestock end, on any given day, when the farmers go to the marts with their livestock, whether it's sheep or whether it's pigs, or whether it's cattle. It's a lottery. They don't know how the trade is going to be. The trade in all of those sectors is controlled by a very small number of people, and the majority are just filling in the gaps. They have no say. They've also no input into fertilizer and feed. And that's the area in which we intend to get involved in. Those two, the inputs and the actual processing.
So maybe you might elaborate a little bit further then on how you're going to tackle the rising costs of inputs, as you call them out, the rising cost of energy and the rising cost of feedstuffs and so on. How are you going to tackle that?
Well, feedstuff and fertilizer are the two big ones. Fertilizer really is a backbreaker. And we have a terrible situation here at the moment where, you know, say, for example, urea is being priced at 1,100 euros a ton. It's about half that in mainland Europe. So, like, what's going on? And like, that's untenable. And you have the same situation with feed. We produce roughly about 2 million ton of animal feed here in this country. There's something between 2 and 4 million ton coming in. But the feed that's produced here by the tillage farmers, that most of that is going into the mills to be bought back out, being processed and bagged by very often the next door neighbors of the actual grain producers at a fairly inflated rate. We would like to see more direct dealing and trading between the grain farmers and the actual stockmen, so that there is more direct buying straight from the farm for this animal feed. We'd also like to see, and we intend to do it, to import fertilizer directly here for direct use by contractors, by farmers, and by small merchants.
Okay, so that's what you're going to do about the rising cost of inputs. Then the outputs. Your milk is going to big dairy conglomerates like Glanbia and Dairy Gold, and the beef and lamb is going to a few processors that control practically perhaps 90% of the meat processing trade. What are you going to do on that end?
Well, we need to take a look at that and see what are the options. And by the way, this is going to be an all-Ireland organisation. At the first meeting in Athlone, which was there a number of weeks ago, we had farmers and we had merchants from the 6 counties at it, and there will be more at the next meeting. So we want to explore all options for adding value to the produce for the benefit of the primary producer. Like at the moment, there's roughly 500,000 ton of sheep meat coming in, either on the hoof or in carcass form, coming into the country, all perfectly legal under the EU regulations. And something is happening here in some sort of a process, and it's been exported as Celtic lamb. Now, I haven't heard of any of the major farming organizations doing anything about that. Is it any wonder that sheep farmers are, at the moment, they're operating on a margin of €7 per yoke? That's outrageous.
It's hard to believe, actually, given the fact that the price of lamb is hugely risen compared to this time last year. And in fact, I think the price being paid to farmers for their lamb by the factories is actually less. So, you know, that's going to be an uphill struggle. Another area of great concern for farmers that was raised at your meeting in Athlone, which I attended, is farm credit. You know, many farmers around Ireland are beholden to the banks, and I think it was mentioned that meeting by one of your speakers, Margaret Hanrahan, that there is approximately 80 farms listed for receivership in the High Courts at present. And the Rural Independent Group in the Dáil, led by Matty McGrath, introduced the Farm Impaired Credit Bill, which was drafted by the former Master of the High Court, Edmund Honohan, and that was brought before the Dáil before Christmas. It would have provided cheap finance for farmers who found themselves in difficulties with the banks. But sadly, that bill was defeated at the second stage by Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael deputies. So I suppose farmers over the years traditionally have always voted either Fianna Fáil or Fine Gael, and it's a bit like turkeys voting for Christmas.
That's at the heart of it. Now, you know, a proper credit facilities for farmers is very important. But to be perfectly honest with you, until you get the actual business model right for the farming enterprise, you can forget about applying credit to it. Like, I would love to see some of those business plans that have been put forward to the banks for financing, you know, dairy expansion, for example, when it's not possible to actually indicate the price point. You don't know what the revenue is going to be month on month, never mind year on year. And with as anecdotal evidence now, for example, that the price per litre could break the 30 cent per litre mark by summer. Like, you know, so the whole business model of farming is, it's a mess. It's a mess. And until that's corrected, and until the farmers have a very strong input into costs and have a better idea and a handle of it, that it's not a runaway horse, you know, you might as well stop talking about getting credit for them to go at this, because they just shouldn't. You know, it's putting the cart before the horse, to be honest. But in relation to, you know, who the farmers vote for, the farmers really need to make their mind up. It's past time, because, you know, sometimes I think that this initiative that we have launched, the Farmers Alliance, sometimes I think that it's too late. I think it's too late. And I'll tell you why. The profile, the age profile of the farmers, it's increasing. Most of them, like myself, they have grey hair. A lot of them are losing it. And there isn't a great follow-up from those who are coming after them. And why? Because, you know, there isn't incomes in it. When they talk about the agri sector, they're not talking about what's going on at the farm gate. They're talking about what's going on at the PLCs. And the people in the fields and at the farm gate, they're just the fools that's producing cheap raw material for the people who's doing the business in the PLCs. So the farmers really haven't got much time to make up their mind. If there were any use, there would be a farmers' party in the Dáil. At the very least, there should be a raft of independents like Mattie McGrath, like Verona Murphy, like Michael Fitzmaurice across the country. They need to make their mind up, because, you know, we're in the last chance saloon on this one.
And I mentioned already the two big issues facing farmers in the years ahead is the proposal to re-wet reclaimed farmland, upon which so many farmers along the Western Seaboard and indeed here in the Midlands depend on for their livelihood and their farming enterprise. And secondly, the reduction of the national herd. Do you envisage the Farming Alliance being in a position to be strong enough to campaign on those two issues?
I'm not quite so sure what inroads can be done on either of those, on the re-wetting of the destocking, because while we're in the EU, our hands are tied. All you got to do is reflect on the period when the designated lands came in, and consider a place like Connemara. 80% of the land in Connemara is designated. And yet, Eamon O'Keefe is still elected, and he was a minister in charge of this at one stage. Where were the farming organisations during that period? Where were the farming organisations during that period? I can't recall any of them making any submissions or having anything to say about why so much of the country was designated. And on top of that, we have it all copper fastened to EU directives. So there's very few degrees of freedom left for farmers, and destocking and re-wetting is just more of the same.
To bring our conversation to a close, can you give me details, please, of how farmers who are watching in can become members of your farming group?
Well, the next meeting will be in Athlone in maybe 2 or 3 weeks' time. I'm not quite sure, but we will let you know. And we'll be in a position to set out then what we're about, and it'll be focused on those 2 areas, the importation of feed and fertilizer, and also exploring all options at the other end to get a greater share in the added value of the produce for the farmers. To work with merchants, small merchants, and small co-ops and contractors in order to reduce the costs of the inputs to the primary producer. That's the thrust of where we're at.
George, I want to thank you for joining me this evening. And as you said, there is a group meeting scheduled to come up in Athlone shortly. And if you follow my personal page, Anna Kavanagh, the details of that meeting will be available as soon as they are sent to me. George, thank you so much for joining me. And to you, our viewers, thank you for watching. I invite you to like and share this video so that we can get it out to a wider audience. Until we meet again the next time on M Compass Media, Bannock de Arif Galer.